So, what does it really take to create a nation? We're going to look at India between the end of World War I and the 1930s, a time when the country wasn't just protesting against colonial rule, it was actually forging a whole new identity. This is the story of how that identity was born from anger, hope, and one seriously powerful struggle.
I mean, seriously, how do you do that? That's the huge question at the heart of this whole story. You've got this land with incredible diversity. So how did the idea of being Indian become a force strong enough to take on an empire? Let's dive in and see how it all went down.
Okay, so our story really kicks off right after World War I. Now, people were hoping that once the war was over, things would get easier. But nope, that's not what happened at all. Instead, India was plunged into a massive crisis, and that crisis became the very fuel for a new wave of nationalism.
After the war, it was just a perfect storm of awful. The British jacked up taxes to pay for their war, the price of everyday stuff doubled, villages were being forced to send their young men to fight, and then on top of all that, crops failed. Famine hit, and a devastating flu epidemic killed somewhere between 12 and 13 million people. This wasn't just an economic downturn, this was deep personal suffering, and people were angry. I mean, really angry.
So you've got this powder keg of anger, right? And what did the British do? They throw a lit match right into it. It was called the Rowlatt Act, and it basically said we can throw any political activist in jail for up to 2 years, no trial, no questions asked. For people in India who had just sacrificed so much for the empire in the war, this felt like a massive slap in the face, a total betrayal.
People did not take this sitting down. The reaction was immediate, and things escalated fast, like shockingly fast. The act is passed in March. By the beginning of April, a nationwide strike called a hartal basically brings the whole country to a halt. The British administration started getting pretty nervous. And then, April 13th, a day that would be scarred into the nation's memory forever.
Okay, so let's set the scene. You've got this public garden, Jallianwala Bagh. It's walled in. A huge crowd is gathered inside. Now, some folks are there to peacefully protest, for sure. But a lot of people, they're just there to celebrate Baisakhi, a major festival. And here's the kicker. Many of them are villagers from outside the city, and they have absolutely no idea that martial law has just been declared.
And then General Dyer shows up. He blocks the main exit, the only real way out, and orders his soldiers to open fire on the unarmed crowd. For 10 solid minutes, they just kept firing and firing until they were almost out of ammunition. The result was a horrific massacre. Hundreds of people killed in cold blood.
And get this wasn't some tragic accident. Dyer himself later admitted his goal was to produce a moral effect. He wanted to terrorize people into submission. But man, did that backfire. It had the complete opposite effect. The news spread like wildfire, and instead of creating awe, it unleashed this wave of pure fury that united Indians in a way nothing else had before. This one act of brutality became the rallying cry for the nation. Out of all this rage and grief, a new voice emerges. A new leader with a totally radical idea for how to fight back. This is where Mahatma Gandhi, recently back from South Africa, steps onto the national stage. And he brings with him a whole new method of struggle, satyagraha.
Now, satyagraha was a complete game changer. It's all about the power of truth. The core idea is, if your cause is just, if you're fighting against injustice, then you don't need physical force to win. It's not about being passive, though. It's an active struggle, what he called a soul force. The real goal was to appeal to the conscience of your opponent and make them see the truth.
It was a deeply moral approach. As Gandhi himself put it, you don't try to hurt your adversary. There's no ill will. The goal is to awaken their conscience, to change their hearts. And he believed this dharma, this principle of nonviolence, was the one thing that could truly unite all Indians.
And this philosophy led directly to the first massive nationwide movement, non-cooperation. The logic behind it? It's so simple, it's brilliant. Gandhi basically said, hey, look, the only reason the British can rule India is because Indians cooperate with them. We work in their offices, we go to their schools, we buy their goods. What if we just stopped? He believed if Indians refused to cooperate, the entire system would collapse within a year.
So the big rallying cry for this new movement was the word Swaraj, or self-rule, and everyone was on board. But this is where things start to get a little bit complicated, because Swaraj meant very different things to different people.
For most people, Swaraj wasn't some lofty political concept. It was deeply personal. If you were a peasant in Awadh, it meant freedom from those crushing rents and forced labor. If you were a plantation worker in Assam, basically trapped on a tea estate by law, it just meant the right to finally go home. Everyone took their own very real, very personal struggle for freedom and mapped it onto this powerful national idea.
So the movement looked totally different depending on where you were. In the cities, it was all about boycotts. Students left British schools, lawyers quit their jobs, people burned foreign-made cloth. But out in the countryside, things often got more violent. Peasants attacked the homes of their landlords. And in places like the Gudam Hills, tribal groups led by charismatic figures like Alluri Sitaram Raju launched a full-on guerrilla war. Now, Raju admired Gandhi, but he was convinced that nonviolence just wasn't going to cut it. Freedom had to be won by force.
And this tension between violence and nonviolence finally boiled over in a small town called Chauri Chaura. A protest that started peacefully turned violent, and demonstrators ended up attacking and killing several policemen. For Gandhi, this was a betrayal of the movement's core principle. He felt the people weren't ready for a purely nonviolent struggle, so he made a decision that stunned everyone. He called off the entire non-cooperation movement. Just like that.
So for most of the 1920s, the movement was kind of fractured. But by the end of the decade, that energy was building again. And the goal was clearer now. Not just self-rule, but Purna Swaraj, complete independence. Gandhi knew he needed one powerful symbol that could unite everyone. And he found it in the most ordinary thing you can imagine.
You see, it was the same problem as before. How do you make a big political idea like complete independence feel real and urgent to a poor farmer or a city worker? You had to connect it to something they dealt with every single day.
And this was the stroke of genius. He chose salt. Why salt? Because everyone, rich, poor, Hindu, Muslim, everyone needed it. The British had a total monopoly on it and slapped a heavy tax on it, making it the perfect symbol of their oppressive rule. The plan itself was a masterpiece of political theater. March 240 miles to the sea, pick up a handful of natural salt, and in doing so, peacefully and publicly break the British law. It was an act of defiance everyone could understand, and more importantly, everyone could replicate.
And wow, did it work. The Salt March was a huge success. It sparked a massive new wave of civil disobedience across the entire country. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? Even a symbol as powerful as salt couldn't magically erase the deep divisions that existed in Indian society. That unity was, once again, pretty fragile.
When you dig into it, you see that different groups had very different and often conflicting reasons for joining in. Rich peasants were fighting high taxes. When the movement was paused without getting those taxes lowered, they lost interest. The business classes wanted an end to colonial trade restrictions, but they got nervous about all the disruption. And crucially, leaders from the Dalit and Muslim communities were wary. They were worried that independence would just mean swapping out British rule for domination by high-caste Hindus.
The most famous example of this was the clash between Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, a brilliant leader for the Dalits, and Gandhi. Ambedkar argued that for his community to have any real freedom, they needed political protection, specifically separate electorates to choose their own representatives. Gandhi was deeply afraid this would permanently divide Hindu society. This wasn't just a political debate, it was a fundamental conflict over what a free India should actually look like and who it was really for.
So if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that the Indian freedom struggle was never one single unified story. It was messy, it was complicated, it was a collection of many different movements with different goals, all loosely held together by a shared desire to end colonial rule. The real work wasn't just protesting the British. It was the constant, difficult negotiation of trying to turn this chorus of different voices into a single national song.
And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. The story of India's independence shows us that a nation isn't just a piece of land with borders. It's an idea that's constantly being built and debated and rebuilt. It's about the struggle to find unity without erasing diversity, a challenge that, in one way or another, pretty much every nation is still facing today.